Have you ever felt emotionally drained after being with someone? Have you ever wondered if certain people in your life might be draining your energy without you even realizing it? Toxic people can camouflage themselves as friends, co-workers, and even close family members. But how can you identify them before they hurt you further? Today, I will reveal the 10 clearest signs to detect a toxic person, and most importantly, how to protect yourself from their influence. Don't miss a second of this video, because you might find out that someone very close to you is more toxic than you thought. Identifying the toxic people in our lives is crucial because these relationships can have a profound and often devastating impact on our emotional, mental, and even physical well-being. Philosophically, the quality of our relationships largely defines our life experience. Aristotle said that virtuous friendship is essential for a full life, but when we surround ourselves with toxic people, we move away from that virtue and immerse ourselves in a relationship that does not allow us to grow. Healthy relationships should be a source of support, motivation, and personal growth. However, when we are trapped in toxic dynamics, that energy becomes a burden, a weight that prevents us from moving forward, and that can plunge us into a constant state of anxiety, stress, and unhappiness. Psychology teaches us that toxic people often exert a negative influence through emotional manipulation, constant criticism, and a lack of empathy that can erode our self-esteem. Often these people project their own insecurities and internal problems onto others, creating a destructive cycle that affects both the victim and the perpetrator. Recognizing these signs is vital because it allows us to set healthy boundaries, protect our peace of mind, and ultimately stay away from people who don't contribute positively to our lives. The lack of action in the face of a toxic relationship can lead to a downward spiral, where we gradually lose our identity and sense of self-worth. Therefore, identifying and distancing ourselves from these negative influences is not only an act of self-preservation, but also a necessary step towards building a life that is more fulfilled, balanced, and aligned with our values and desires. This awareness allows us to create an environment where relationships are reciprocal, respectful, and uplifting, aligned with the philosophical principle of eudaimonia, or human flourishing, where we seek not only the absence of discomfort, but a life rich in meaning and well-being. Constant negativity is a clear sign of a toxic person, and its impact on our lives can be more profound than we imagine. Being around someone who always sees the negative side of things, who constantly complains, or who never finds anything positive in any situation, can drain our energy subtly but effectively. This kind of pessimistic attitude tends to rub off, affecting not only our mood, but also our overall outlook on life. By spending time with someone like that, we can begin to absorb their dark view of the world, which can lead us into a spiral of negative thoughts. Over time, this constant exposure to negativity can diminish our ability to enjoy simple things, making us more prone to anxiety, depression, and stress. In addition, constant negativity can create an environment where problems seem insurmountable, and any effort to improve is seen as futile or pointless. People who immerse themselves in this type of mindset not only limit their own growth, but they also try, consciously or not, to drag others into their same mental trap. In terms of energy, it's as if we're facing a constant leak. Every interaction with a perpetually negative person leaves us feeling exhausted, frustrated, and less able to face our own challenges. This corrosive influence not only affects our mental well-being, but it can also interfere with our relationships, our work, and our physical health. In an environment where negativity is a constant, it's difficult to stay positive, and over time, we can start to question our own abilities and feel stuck in an endless cycle of pessimism and hopelessness. It's vital to recognize this sign early because by doing so, we can take steps to protect ourselves, either by setting clear boundaries, limiting exposure to these people, or, in more extreme cases, by distancing ourselves from their influence entirely. By taking control over who we allow into our life and how much power we give them over our emotional well-being, we are making a conscious choice to prioritize our peace of mind and personal growth. Emotional manipulation is one of the most insidious tools toxic people use to maintain control over others. Often, this form of manipulation is subtle and difficult to detect at first, as it is disguised as concern, love, or genuine interest. However, over time, the true nature of these tactics begins to reveal itself when we realize that our emotions are being used as a means to satisfy someone else's needs and wants, at the expense of our own well-being. Emotional manipulators are experts at identifying our vulnerabilities, and they exploit them to generate feelings of guilt, fear, or dependence, which they then use to steer our actions and decisions in the direction that suits them. For example, they can make us feel guilty for not meeting their expectations or demands, suggesting that our actions or decisions are a sign that we don't value them enough. This tactic is especially effective in close relationships, such as with close friends, family, or partners, where the toxic person may play on the fear of abandonment or rejection to make sure we act the way they want. Through manipulative phrases such as, "If you really love me, you would do this for me," or "After everything I've done for you, how can you deny me this?" They manage to sow doubt in our minds, making us question our own emotions and decisions. Another aspect of emotional manipulation is reality distortion, where the toxic person can misrepresent facts or situations to confuse us and make us doubt our perception of reality. This type of manipulation, known as gaslighting, leads us to feel insecure, unstable, and increasingly dependent on the manipulator to obtain a correct version of events. As our self-confidence decreases, the influence this person has over our lives increases, making us feel trapped in a relationship where every step seems to be guided by their desires rather than ours. The cumulative effect of emotional manipulation can be devastating, eroding our self-esteem, our ability to make autonomous decisions, and our sense of identity. Over time, we may begin to feel that our emotions no longer belong to us, but are completely under someone else's control. This leaves us in a state of constant anxiety and confusion, where every decision seems to be permeated by fear of disappointing or angering the manipulator. Emotional manipulation not only affects our mental health, but it can also have a physical impact, as constant stress can manifest itself in health problems such as insomnia, headaches, and other stress-related disorders. Recognizing the signs of emotional manipulation is the first step to breaking free from their control. It's crucial to learn to identify when our emotions are being manipulated and take steps to set clear boundaries. This may mean confronting the manipulator, seeking outside support, or in some cases, cutting ties with that person entirely. Emotional manipulation is a form of abuse that should not be taken lightly, as its impact can be profound and long-lasting. By protecting ourselves from this toxic influence, we are taking a crucial step towards regaining our emotional autonomy and overall well-being. Lack of responsibility is a common characteristic in toxic people and manifests itself in their constant inability or refusal to accept blame or admit their mistakes. This type of behavior is especially harmful in relationships, as it undermines trust, creates unnecessary conflict, and perpetuates a cycle of negativity and resentment. Toxic people, when faced with a situation where they might be responsible for a problem or mistake, are quick to look for excuses or blame others instead of taking responsibility for their actions. Not only does this behavior reflect a deep insecurity and lack of emotional maturity, but it also reveals a tendency to prioritize their own ego over truth and justice. Avoidance of responsibility can manifest itself in many ways, from blaming external circumstances to manipulating the situation to make others feel responsible for their mistakes. In an argument, for example, a toxic person may become defensive or even aggressive when confronted with their behavior, diverting the conversation to the other person's mistakes or minimizing the severity of their actions. Not only does this type of response prevent the problem at hand from being resolved, but it also leaves the other person feeling confused, guilty, or even responsible for something that was clearly not their fault. Another aspect of lack of accountability is the inability to offer sincere apologies. When toxic people are forced to apologize, they often do so in a superficial way or with the intention of manipulating the situation in their favor. They may offer apologies that aren't really sincere, such as, "I'm sorry if you were offended," which in fact shift the blame to the person feeling hurt rather than taking their own responsibility. This type of apology is a classic example of how they evade responsibility, as instead of acknowledging their mistake, they try to minimize it or even deny that they made it in the first place. The lack of accountability also extends to their inability to learn from their mistakes. By not accepting blame or reflecting on their actions, toxic people tend to repeat the same patterns of behavior over and over again, creating a cycle of dysfunction that affects not only their own lives, but also those of those around them. This perpetual cycle of denial and repetition can lead to a buildup of resentment in relationships, where the other person feels like they are always cleaning up the emotional mess left by the toxic person, without the latter showing any desire to change or improve. Additionally, a lack of accountability in toxic people can create an environment where others feel they should always be defensive or ready to take the blame for things they didn't do. Not only is this emotionally draining, but it can also erode the self-esteem of those caught up in this type of dynamic, making them feel like they are incapable or insufficient. Over time, this toxic environment can lead to significant deterioration of mental and emotional health, where the person suffering from the toxic person's avoidance of responsibility begins to doubt their own perception and judgment. Acknowledging a lack of responsibility as a sign of toxicity is essential to protecting yourself from its destructive impact. By being aware of this behavior, we can set clear and firm boundaries, demanding accountability and transparency in our relationships. This may involve confronting the toxic person when they evade responsibility, or, in more extreme cases, considering walking away from the relationship if the pattern persists. By taking these steps, we not only protect our emotional well-being, but we also send a clear message that we will not tolerate behaviors that erode trust and integrity in our relationships. Envy and jealousy are deeply corrosive emotions that, when persistently manifested in a person, can severely poison any relationship, whether friendship, family, or romantic. These emotions, although natural in small doses, become toxic when they are fed and expressed in an uncontrolled way, becoming a constant pattern that undermines trust and well-being among the people involved. Envy at its core is a feeling of dissatisfaction or resentment toward another person because of their accomplishments, possessions, or qualities. Jealousy, on the other hand, is often related to the fear of losing something we value, such as a relationship, to a third party. Both feelings, although different in their origin, share a common core: insecurity and constant comparison, which distort the perception of oneself and others. When a toxic person feels envy or jealousy, they often look for ways to belittle or sabotage those they perceive as a threat. This behavior can take many forms, from sarcastic or derogatory comments to more subtle attempts to undermine the other person's self-esteem. For example, someone who is jealous of a friend's success might try to minimize their accomplishments or imply that they don't really deserve them, sowing doubt in their mind. Not only do these actions create tension and conflict, but they also erode the trust and closeness that should exist in a healthy relationship. Envy and jealousy can also lead to possessive or controlling behavior, especially in romantic relationships. A person who is constantly jealous may become overly vigilant or distrustful, demanding explanations for every little action from their partner or wanting to know every detail of their life. This type of behavior not only stifles the personal freedom of the other, but also creates an environment of distrust and paranoia, where every interaction becomes a test of loyalty or commitment. Over time, this type of dynamic can destroy love and mutual respect, replacing them with resentment and emotional distance. In addition, envy and jealousy can lead to destructive competition within a relationship. Instead of celebrating the accomplishments or qualities of others, an envious person sees those successes as a direct threat to their own worth. This can lead to constant attempts to overcome or compare, where the success of the other is never enough reason for joy, but rather a reason to feel inferior or belittled. This competitive attitude is not only exhausting for both parties, but also creates a hostile environment where collaboration and mutual support are replaced by rivalry and mistrust. The root of envy and jealousy is often found in deep personal insecurity. People who feel these emotions consistently often lack strong self-esteem and view themselves through a lens of inadequacy. Instead of working on their own personal growth or building their confidence, they project their insecurities onto others, seeing the success or happiness of others as a validation of their own shortcomings. This cycle of insecurity and projection not only perpetuates feelings of envy and jealousy, but also prevents any possibility of a genuine and supportive relationship. It's important to recognize when envy and jealousy are at play in a relationship, as ignoring these feelings can lead to an inevitable deterioration of the connection between people. Open and honest communication is crucial in these cases, allowing people to express their feelings and work together to address underlying insecurities. However, when the envious or jealous person is unwilling to acknowledge or change their behavior, it may be necessary to reevaluate the relationship and consider distancing themselves to protect one's peace of mind and emotional well-being. Envy and jealousy, if left unchecked, have the power to destroy even the strongest relationships, turning what should be a source of support and joy into a constant battleground of insecurities and resentments. The need for control is a core characteristic of toxic people, and their desire to dominate every aspect of our lives and decisions can have devastating consequences for our autonomy and emotional well-being. This behavior arises from a deep insecurity and a lack of trust in others, which leads the toxic person to feel the need to always be in charge, to mold and direct the lives of those around them according to their own vision and desires. Instead of respecting the independence and free will of the people with whom they interact, they seek to impose their own ideas, decisions, and values, creating an environment where their needs and opinions become the only valid truth. One of the ways in which this need for control manifests itself is through emotional manipulation. Toxic people may employ tactics such as guilt, fear, or emotional pressure to influence our decisions. For example, they can make us feel guilty for not following their advice, or for making decisions that don't align with their expectations, suggesting that by doing so, we are being selfish, ungrateful, or disrespectful. This type of manipulation is particularly effective in close relationships, where emotional bonds are strong and the desire to avoid conflict or disappointment can lead us to give in to their demands. Over time, this control dynamic erodes our ability to make autonomous decisions and makes us increasingly dependent on the toxic person's approval or validation. Another way toxic people try to control our lives is through micromanagement and constant criticism. Instead of relying on our ability to handle our own decisions, they seek to be involved in every detail, from small everyday choices to big life decisions. This behavior can cause us to feel suffocated, as if we are constantly under surveillance, with no room to make mistakes or learn from our own experiences. Constant criticism, often disguised as worry or advice, can undermine our self-confidence and lead us to question our abilities and judgment. Over time, this environment of control and criticism can make us feel incompetent or unable to manage our own lives without their direction. Control can also manifest itself in the form of isolation. Toxic people often seek to limit our interactions with others, especially those who might offer a different perspective or question their dominance. They may try to alienate you from friends and family, suggesting that those relationships are harmful or that those individuals don't understand you the way they do. In doing so, they seek to create an emotional and social dependence, where the controlled person has fewer and fewer external resources and feels more isolated and vulnerable. This isolation reinforces their control, since by reducing our external connections, they limit our opportunities to receive support or advice that could help us see the situation more objectively. The need for control is also reflected in the toxic person's insistence that their opinions and decisions are the only correct ones. Any attempt to challenge or question their authority may be met with hostility, disdain, or emotional punishment. This attitude creates an environment where disagreement becomes a risk, and where the controlled person feels increasingly pressured to conform to the toxic person's expectations and desires, even when these go against their own values or desires. Over time, this type of dynamic can lead to a loss of identity, where the controlled person begins to doubt their own thoughts, feelings, and needs, increasingly adapting to the demands of the toxic person at the cost of their own well-being. Destructive criticism is one of the most common and devastating ways in which toxic people exert their negative influence on others. Unlike constructive criticism, which is designed to help, guide, and encourage growth, destructive criticism has the sole purpose of undermining self-esteem, creating insecurity, and exerting control over the person receiving it. The key to distinguishing between the two lies in the intention and the way in which they are expressed. Constructive criticism is formulated with respect and empathy, acknowledging the value of the other person while offering a perspective or suggestion for improvement. For example, constructive criticism might say, "You've done a good job at this, but perhaps you could consider adjusting this aspect for better results." This type of feedback not only recognizes effort, but also offers a solution or avenue for growth. In contrast, destructive criticism lacks that consideration and is often expressed in a cruel, sarcastic, or insensitive way. Rather than focusing on the specific behavior or action that could be improved, destructive criticism tends to attack the person's character or self-worth. An example of a destructive criticism would be, "You can't do anything right. You always ruin everything." Not only is this type of comment hurtful, but it's also intentionally vague and pervasive, leaving the person feeling helpless, unable to respond or improve. There are no suggestions, no recognition of effort, just a direct attack that seeks to do damage. Over time, receiving destructive criticism on a consistent basis can lead to a significant erosion of self-esteem. The person begins to internalize these messages, believing that they are really incompetent, useless, or insufficient. This emotional damage is particularly serious because it affects a person's perception of themselves, which can impact all areas of their life, from their personal relationships to their performance at work or school. In addition, destructive criticism not only undermines self-esteem, but also generates an environment of fear and insecurity. People who are subject to this type of constant criticism may become reluctant to take risks, try new things, or even express their opinions for fear of being humiliated or belittled again. This creates a vicious cycle where the person becomes more and more withdrawn, which in turn can be interpreted by the toxic person as a confirmation of their supposed incompetence, which further justifies their criticism. In this way, destructive criticism not only damages self-esteem, but also limits personal and professional growth, trapping the person in a cycle of negativity and self-loathing. Dishonesty is one of the clearest and most devastating signs of toxicity in a relationship, as it directly attacks one of the fundamental pillars on which any meaningful human connection is built: trust. Trust is the cement that holds people together, allowing them to open up, share, and support each other without fear of being betrayed or deceived. When dishonesty becomes a pattern in a relationship, that cement begins to crack, until eventually the structure of the relationship completely falls apart. Lies, whether big or small, have a corrosive effect on the relationship, sowing seeds of doubt, uncertainty, and resentment. Every lie told in a relationship, no matter how insignificant it may seem, is a blow to the trust the other person has placed in us. At first, those little lies may seem harmless, perhaps even necessary to avoid conflict or protect the other person from a painful truth. However, the reality is that the accumulation of lies, no matter how small, creates an environment in which the truth begins to lose value. Over time, the person who has been deceived begins to question everything from the most trivial comments to the most serious commitments, because they can no longer be sure that what they are being told is genuine or authentic. Dishonesty also has a profoundly destructive effect on the person who perpetrates it. Each lie told requires another to sustain it, creating an endless cycle of deception and falsehood that consumes energy and erodes personal integrity. Living in a constant state of dishonesty forces the toxic person to always be defensive, always ready to cover up their traces and avoid being discovered. This state of constant tension not only affects the quality of the relationship, but also prevents the development of a genuine and deep connection, as the liar becomes caught in his own web of deception, unable to be truly honest, even with himself. Also, when a person in a relationship discovers that they have been cheated on repeatedly, they feel betrayed on a fundamental level. Dishonesty not only damages trust in the other person, but can also lead to a loss of self-confidence. The victim of dishonesty may begin to question their own judgment, wondering how they didn't see the signs before, or if it's possible to trust someone in the future. This type of emotional damage can be long-lasting, affecting not only the immediate relationship, but also the person's ability to establish healthy relationships in the future. The fear of being cheated on again can lead to a reluctance to open up or fully commit to new relationships, creating a cycle of distrust and emotional distance that is difficult to break. Selfishness and lack of empathy are deeply damaging behaviors in any relationship, as both are rooted in a perspective that places a person's needs, wants, and perspectives above those of others, without considering the impact this has on those around them. When a person behaves self-centeredly, they tend to prioritize their own well-being and satisfaction over everything else, which creates an imbalance in the dynamics of the relationship. This imbalance not only affects the other person involved, but also deteriorates the quality and depth of the connection that could exist between the two of you. A selfish person usually sees the world through a lens where their needs and desires are the only thing that matters. In a relationship, this manifests itself in a variety of ways, such as making unilateral decisions without considering how they will affect the other person, demanding constant attention without reciprocity, and expecting their wishes to always be a priority. For example, in a friendship, a selfish person might constantly choose activities that only interest them, ignoring their friends' interests, or, in a romantic relationship, they might insist that their emotional, physical, or even material needs always be met first, leaving their partner feeling neglected and devalued. This type of behavior creates an environment in which the relationship ceases to be a mutual exchange of support and care, and becomes a one-way experience where one person gives and the other takes. An abusive or dominant relationship is one of the most serious manifestations of toxicity in a relationship, where one person seeks to control and subdue the other through various forms of abuse, whether emotional, physical, or even psychological. This type of relationship is characterized by a pattern of behavior in which one person uses power and control to dominate the other, often resorting to manipulation, intimidation, fear, and violence to maintain their authority. Identifying the signs of abuse is crucial to being able to recognize when a relationship has crossed the line from simply toxic to truly dangerous, and to take steps to protect yourself and seek help. Emotional abuse is a subtle but extremely harmful form of control, where the abusive person uses words, gestures, and attitudes to degrade, humiliate, and destabilize their partner. One of the most common signs of emotional abuse is constant criticism or devaluation of the other person, making them feel like they're never enough or that they're always wrong. This can include name-calling, hurtful sarcasm, belittling accomplishments, or invalidating the other person's feelings. Over time, these tactics erode the victim's self-esteem and confidence, making them increasingly dependent on the abuser, who becomes the source of validation, even if this validation is scarce or conditional. In addition, emotional abuse often includes isolating the victim from friends and family, leaving them without an external support network, and making them more vulnerable to the abuser's control. Physical abuse is more obvious, as it involves the use of force to intimidate or cause harm. This can include hitting, pushing, strangulation, or any other type of unwanted physical contact that is intended to cause pain or fear. However, physical abuse does not always manifest itself in obvious ways from the beginning. It often starts with behaviors that may seem minor or isolated, such as forcefully grabbing an arm or pushing during an argument, and over time, these behaviors escalate. The abusive person may justify these acts as momentary mistakes or loss of control, but they are actually part of a pattern of behavior aimed at establishing dominance and control over the other person. It is important to recognize that any type of physical violence in a relationship is a red flag and should never be minimized or justified. Psychological abuse, though less visible than physical abuse, is equally destructive. This type of abuse involves mental and emotional manipulation to disorient and confuse the victim, often causing them to doubt their own perception of reality. An example of this is gaslighting, a tactic in which the abuser denies, distorts, or invents information to make the victim question their memory, perception, or sanity. For example, the abuser may deny that certain events occurred, even though the victim clearly remembers them, or they may manipulate situations to make it appear that the victim is irrational or exaggerated. This type of abuse is extremely harmful because it undermines self-confidence, leaving you completely dependent on the abuser to interpret reality. If you found this video useful, don't forget to like it, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss out on more content that helps you build healthier relationships. See you in the next video.